The floorboards creaked beneath my feet as I dragged my suitcase across the threshold, the sound amplified in the emptiness of the cabin. Dust particles danced in the shafts of late afternoon sunlight that filtered through grimy windows. The air smelled of pine, mildew, and something else. Hope, perhaps. Hope that he wouldn't find me here. Home sweet home, I whispered to myself, my voice sounding foreign in the silence that had enveloped me during the 6-hour drive from Philadelphia. I'd switched cars twice, paid cash for everything, and turned off my phone. Classic paranoid behavior, but when you're running from someone like Marcus, paranoia keeps you alive. I set my suitcase down and surveyed my new sanctuary, or prison, depending on how you looked at it. The cabin belonged to my late grandmother, untouched for years since her passing. It sat nestled deep in the Poconos, miles from the nearest neighbor, accessible only by a winding dirt road that threatened to swallow my rental car whole. Not exactly 5-star accommodations, but it had running water, electricity, and most importantly, Marcus didn't know it existed. My fingers trembled slightly as I pulled the chain on the single bulb hanging from the ceiling. The yellow light revealed cobwebs in corners, a worn leather couch facing a cold fireplace, and a tiny kitchenette with appliances from at least 3 decades ago. A ladder led to a loft bedroom, and a narrow door presumably led to a bathroom. Simple. Isolated. Perfect. 30 days, I reminded myself. That was the plan. Hide for a month until my visa came through, then leave the country and start over somewhere Marcus couldn't reach. Australia, maybe. Or New Zealand. Somewhere with oceans between us. The bruises on my ribs had faded to a sickly yellow, but they still ached when I stretched to place my meager groceries in the ancient refrigerator. My reflection caught in the microwave door. Pale skin, dark circles under hazel eyes, brown hair hastily dyed a flat black and cut short in a gas station bathroom. I hardly recognized myself. That was the point. As darkness fell, the cabin's charm quickly evaporated. Every creak became a footstep, every rustle outside a potential threat. I lit a fire in the old stone fireplace, the smoke initially billowing back before finding its way up the chimney. The warmth helped, but the shadows it cast against the walls made me jumpy. I unpacked quickly, arranging my new burner phone, the remaining cash, and my passport on the rickety kitchen table. $3,000, a new identity waiting in Philadelphia, and 30 days of solitude stood between me and freedom. I could do this. I had to. Sleep eluded me that first night. I lay on the dusty mattress in the loft, a kitchen knife under my pillow, listening to the symphony of unfamiliar sounds, the hoot of an owl, the scratch of branches against the roof, the settling of old wood. My mind drifted to the last time I saw Marcus, his handsome face contorted with rage, promises of what he'd do if I ever left him again pouring from lips that had once whispered love against my skin. 6 months we'd been together before the first slap, another 3 before the first trip to the emergency room with a clumsy fall down the stairs story. 2 years total before I realized he would eventually kill me, not by accident, but because ownership was the only form of love he understood. Dawn broke with merciful light streaming through the small loft window. I'd managed perhaps 2 hours of restless sleep, but adrenaline kept me functioning. I made instant coffee in a chipped mug and sat on the cabin's small porch, watching mist rise from the surrounding pines. For the first time in months, I took a full breath without looking over my shoulder. The days fell into a routine of sorts. I cleaned the cabin methodically, scrubbing away years of neglect, finding comfort in the mindless physical labor. I rationed my supplies carefully, venturing out only once to the small general store 15 miles away, wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, paying cash and avoiding conversation. The elderly cashier had smiled kindly, but I couldn't bring myself to smile back. Trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. By the end of the first week, the cabin felt less like a hiding place and more like a sanctuary. I'd found my grandmother's old books, dog-eared paperbacks with cracked spines, Agatha Christie mysteries, Jane Austen romances, dog training manuals that made me smile despite everything. She'd been eccentric but kind, taking me fishing when I was little, teaching me to build fires and identify edible berries, skills I'd forgotten in the rush to become someone Marcus approved of. On the 8th night, the storm hit. Not just rain, but a vicious northeastern tempest that howled through the trees and hammered against the cabin like it had a personal vendetta. The electricity flickered and died within the first hour, leaving me huddled by the fireplace, wrapped in every blanket I could find, watching the windows rattle in their frames and praying the roof would hold. The knock came at 2:17 a.m. I know because I'd been obsessively checking the luminous dial of my watch, counting minutes until daybreak. 3 sharp raps against the front door, barely audible above the storm's fury, but unmistakable. My blood turned to ice. No one knew I was here. No one should be outside in this weather. No one except someone who had been hunting me. I grabbed the knife from beside me, its blade catching the firelight as I stood frozen, willing the sound to have been a branch or debris flung by the wind. Then it came again, more insistent this time. Knock, knock, knock. I know you're in there. A male voice, deep and accented. Italian, maybe, but definitely not Marcus. Open the door before we both drown out here. Relief was short-lived. A stranger wasn't necessarily safer than the devil I knew. I approached the door silently, knife gripped white-knuckled in my hand. Who are you? I called, trying to sound braver than I felt. A pause. Someone who took a wrong turn and went off the road half a mile back. My car is stuck, my phone is dead, and I'm soaked to the bone. I saw your chimney smoke. I pressed my eye to the peephole, but darkness and rain obscured anything but the vague outline of a tall figure. Common sense told me to ignore him. Wait him out. But if he was telling the truth, there's a shed around back, I said finally. You can shelter there until morning, a sound that might have been a laugh. In this weather? Be reasonable. I just need to use your phone and wait out the worst of the storm. My grandmother had always said my soft heart would be my undoing. She wasn't wrong. I don't have a landline, and cell reception is non-existent here, I said, which was true. How do I know you're not lying? You don't, came the simple reply. But I give you my word I mean no harm. And if I did, this flimsy door wouldn't keep me out anyway. The casual threat in his words sent a chill down my spine, but there was something in his tone, not desperation exactly, but a certainty that I would eventually comply. That made me uneasy in a different way. I made a decision, probably a foolish one. Step back from the door, 10 feet. I have a gun. A lie, but he didn't know that. I'll open it, but you stay where you are until I say otherwise. No response, but I imagined him complying. I took a deep breath, turned the deadbolt, and pulled the door open just enough to peer out, knife hidden behind it. The storm rushed in immediately, wind, rain, and the silhouette of a man standing exactly where I'd instructed, illuminated briefly by a flash of lightning. That momentary glimpse burned into my retinas. Broad shoulders in a soaking wet suit that probably cost more than my car, dark hair plastered to a face with features that seemed carved from marble, and eyes that assessed me with an intensity that made me instinctively tighten my grip on the knife. He was nothing like Marcus. Where my ex was all golden California good looks and practiced charm, this man exuded a cold, controlled power. No smile, no attempt to appear harmless. Just watchful patience and something else I couldn't name. May I come in now? His voice carried easily over the storm, that slight accent wrapping around the words like silk over steel. Another flash of lightning revealed something I'd missed. A sleek black car half visible through the trees, nose buried in mud. So he hadn't been lying. At least not about that. Fine, I said, stepping back. But slowly. He moved with unexpected grace for someone his size, crossing the threshold in 2 long strides. Water cascaded from his clothes onto my clean floor, and I had the absurd urge to hand him a towel before remembering this wasn't a social call. Up close, he was even more imposing. Well over 6 feet, with the physique of someone who didn't get that way from casual gym visits. I closed the door against the storm, but maintained distance between us. Knife now visible in my hand. That's far enough. He glanced at the knife with something like amusement. I appreciate the caution, but it's unnecessary. As I said, I just need to wait out the storm. His eyes surveyed the cabin, taking in the sparse furnishings, the single suitcase, the careful organization that screamed temporary accommodation. You're alone here? He asked, though it sounded like he already knew the answer. My husband will be back any minute. I lied. He went to check on our generator. The stranger's mouth quirked slightly at one corner. In this weather? He must be devoted. He made no move to remove his sodden jacket or shoes. You have a name? Jane, I said, the alias I'd been using since I left. Jane, he repeated, as if tasting the word and finding it lacking. I'm Alessio. No last name. Just like I'd given no last name. We were both lying about something, it seemed. There are towels in the bathroom, I said, gesturing with my free hand while maintaining my grip on the knife. First door on the right. You can dry off there. He nodded once, a regal acknowledgement, and moved toward the bathroom with that same deliberate grace. I noticed he didn't leave wet footprints. He was gliding his feet across the floor to avoid marking it. The consideration was unexpected, and somehow more unsettling than rudeness would have been. While he was in the bathroom, I quickly scanned the cabin for anything that might reveal my true identity. The passport and cash were already hidden under a loose floorboard beneath the couch. Nothing else would give me away. When he emerged, he'd removed his suit jacket and shoes, leaving him in a white shirt that clung to his torso and black dress pants. He'd made an attempt to dry his hair, which now curled slightly at the nape of his neck. Without the added bulk of the jacket, I could see the lean, muscular build beneath, and something else that made my stomach drop. Just visible beneath his arm, where the wet shirt had become almost transparent, was the outline of a shoulder holster. He was armed. Our eyes met, and I knew he knew I'd seen it. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. You said you went off the road, I said finally, voice steadier than I felt. Where were you headed? Business in Stroudsburg, he replied, making no move to explain the gun or remove it. I took what my GPS assured me was a shortcut. Clearly, technology sometimes lies. My mind raced. Stroudsburg was at least 40 miles away. What kind of business would bring a man in a bespoke suit and a concealed weapon to a town like that? Nothing legal, most likely. The storm should pass by morning, I said. You can sleep on the couch. I'll be upstairs. Where I could barricade myself in was the unspoken addition. He smiled then, a slight curve of lips that didn't reach his eyes. Very hospitable, Jane. Thank you. I gathered a spare blanket and pillow, tossing them onto the couch without approaching him. There's water in the kitchen if you're thirsty. Bathroom's all yours. I'm going to bed. As I turned toward the ladder, his voice stopped me. Strange place for a woman to be alone. The observation hung in the air between us. I looked back at him, meeting his gaze directly. I could say the same about you. Strange road for a businessman to be traveling alone at night. Something flickered in his eyes. Approval, perhaps. Fair enough. Sleep well, Jane. I climbed the ladder to the loft, hyper-aware of his eyes on me until I disappeared from view. Sleep was out of the question now. I arranged pillows under the blanket to resemble a sleeping form, then positioned myself at the top of the ladder, knife in hand, prepared for a long night of vigilance. Below, I could hear him moving quietly around the cabin. The soft clink of a glass in the kitchen, the creak of the couch as he settled his weight onto it. Then silence, broken only by the continuing rage of the storm outside. I didn't know who this Alessio was, but one thing was clear. I'd just invited a dangerous man into my sanctuary, and I had no idea if I'd live to regret it. Morning arrived with unsettling quietness. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean, sunlight filtering through leaves still heavy with raindrops. I hadn't slept, my body aching from hours perched at the top of the ladder, listening to every sound from below. There hadn't been many. My uninvited guest had remained on the couch, his breathing eventually evening into what seemed like sleep. But I couldn't be sure. Something about his stillness felt deliberate, controlled even in unconsciousness. I crept down the ladder, knife still clutched in my hand, careful to avoid the third rung that always creaked. The main room came into view, and I froze. The couch was empty, the blanket neatly folded. My heart hammered against my ribs as I scanned the room. No sign of him. The bathroom door stood open, revealing emptiness within. Relief flooded me. He'd left. Probably at first light, returning to whatever business had brought him to this remote area. Then I smelled coffee. I whirled toward the kitchen, and there he stood, his back to me, broad shoulders filling out a still damp white shirt as he poured steaming liquid into 2 mugs. He'd found my grandmother's ancient percolator and somehow coaxed it to life. You move quietly, he said without turning, as if eyes in the back of his head had caught my dissent. But not quietly enough. He turned then, extending one of the mugs toward me. In daylight, with the cabin brightened by morning sun, I could see him clearly for the first time. My initial impression hadn't been wrong. He was handsome in that severe, uncompromising way that suggested he rarely smiled. Dark hair, now dried and swept back from a face of sharp angles, and watchful eyes so dark they appeared almost black, Italian heritage evident in his olive complexion and the strong line of his nose. "I didn't know how you take it," he said, nodding to the coffee. I didn't move to take it. "Black is fine. Thank you." He set the mug on the counter between us, respecting my reluctance to come closer. "Your hospitality saved me from an uncomfortable night. I appreciate it." "Your car," I said, changing the subject. "Is it still stuck?" "I'll deal with it shortly." He sipped his coffee, eyes never leaving my face. "You didn't sleep." It wasn't a question. I didn't answer. "The knife is unnecessary," he added, nodding toward my hand. "If I wanted to harm you, I would have done so already. Forgive me if that's not entirely reassuring," I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something adjacent to amusement. "You're right to be cautious. A woman alone should be." His eyes tracked deliberately to the concealer I'd applied to hide the fading yellow bruise on my cheekbone. "Especially one who's running from something." Ice flooded my veins. Had Marcus found me? Was this man working for him? "I'm not running," I said automatically. "I'm on vacation." "With fake hair dye that's staining your neck? With a knife under your pillow and jumps at shadows?" He set down his mug. "Please, don't insult my intelligence." I tightened my grip on the knife. "Who are you? Really? I told you." "Alessio Russo." He didn't elaborate, but the name hung in the air between us, weighted with an unspoken significance. "And what exactly is your business in Stroudsburg, Mr. Russo?" "Just Alessio." He moved toward the window, gazing out at the mud-streaked clearing where his car sat half-submerged. "And my business is my own." The sunlight caught something on his right hand that I hadn't noticed in the dim light of the previous night, a heavy gold ring with an intricate crest. Something about it tugged at my memory, but I couldn't place it. "I should get my car out before the mud hardens," he said, turning back to me. "Do you have a shovel I could borrow?" I nodded toward the back door. "In the shed. There should be one leaning against the wall." "Thank you." He moved to the door, then paused, turning back. "You needn't worry about me returning. Once my car is free, I'll be on my way." Something in his tone made me think he was testing me, watching for my reaction. Relief would be natural, a strange man leaving my isolated cabin, but what I felt was more complicated. Despite his intimidating presence and the obvious danger he represented, there had been no overt threat, and when he left, I would be alone again, with only my fears for company. "There's more coffee in the pot," I said instead, surprising myself. He studied me for a moment longer, then nodded once before stepping outside. Through the window, I watched him walk to the shed, his movements precise and economical. No wasted energy. He found the shovel exactly where I'd said it would be, and set to work on his car with focused efficiency. I used his absence to check that my passport and money were still safe beneath the floorboard. Everything was untouched. Whatever he wasn't a common thief. By the time he returned, mud-splattered but successful, I'd changed into fresh clothes and made more coffee. "Your car is free?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Yes." He accepted the fresh mug I offered, maintaining a careful distance. "The road should be passable now that the rain has stopped." "Good." I hesitated, then asked the question that had been bothering me. "How did you find this place? It's not on any maps." His eyes met mine over the rim of his mug. "I didn't find it. I got lost." A slight pause. "Though I admit, I'm curious why someone would choose such an isolated spot for a vacation." The way he said the last word made it clear he didn't believe my cover story for a second. "I like privacy," I said simply. "Clearly." He set down his mug. "Well, I won't intrude on it any longer." As he moved to gather his still-damp jacket and shoes, I found myself watching him with conflicted emotions. Every instinct told me to be glad he was leaving, yet something nagged at me, a sense that his arrival hadn't been mere coincidence. "Mr. Russo," I said suddenly. "Alessio." How did you really end up here? This road doesn't lead anywhere except this cabin." He paused in the act of putting on his jacket, something unreadable crossing his face. "Perhaps I was meant to find you." The statement hung between us, loaded with implications I couldn't decipher. "What does that mean?" I asked, tensing. He seemed to reconsider whatever he'd been about to say. "It means nothing. A poor attempt at humor," he finished, buttoning his jacket. "Thank you again for your hospitality, Jane. Or whatever your real name is." I walked him to the door, maintaining a safe distance. He stepped outside, then turned back one last time. "One piece of advice," he said, his voice lowered. "If you're hiding, you've chosen well. But the people who own the general store in town, they're talkative, and they remember strangers." My blood ran cold. I'd been careful at the store, but clearly not careful enough if he knew I'd been there. "Are you threatening me?" I asked, fingers tightening around the knife I still held. Something like disappointment flickered in his eyes. "No, I'm helping you. There's a difference." He nodded once, a gesture that somehow conveyed both respect and farewell. "Take care of yourself, Jane." I watched from the doorway as he walked to his car, a sleek black Maserati that looked absurdly out of place in these rustic surroundings. The engine purred to life, and he executed a careful 3-point turn before disappearing down the muddy track that led back to the main road. Only when the sound of his engine had faded completely did I close the door, throwing the deadbolt with shaking hands. My sanctuary had been compromised. Not by Marcus, but by a stranger who had seen too much, intuited too much. Alessio Russo. The name meant nothing to me, but the casual power he exuded, the concealed weapon, the expensive car and clothes, all pointed to someone accustomed to danger and authority. I spent the morning in a frenzy of anxious activity, checking and rechecking the locks, peering out windows, half expecting to see his car return. By afternoon, exhaustion from my sleepless night caught up with me, and I finally collapsed onto the couch, knife within reach. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, the cabin was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Something had woken me, a sound I couldn't immediately identify. Then I heard it again, a car engine, growing louder as it approached. He'd come back, or worse, he'd told Marcus where to find me. I scrambled for the knife, heart pounding as I moved to the window. Through the trees I caught glimpses of a vehicle approaching. Not the sleek black Maserati, but a familiar silver sedan that made my blood freeze in my veins. Marcus had found me. Time slowed to a crawl as I watched the car pull into the clearing, mud splashing against its pristine finish. The engine cut off, and there he was, stepping out like he owned the place, golden hair catching the sunlight, designer sunglasses hiding eyes I knew would be cold with fury. The smile I'd once loved now twisted into something that made my stomach clench with terror. How? How had he found me? No time to wonder. No time for anything but action. I grabbed my emergency bag, always packed, always ready, and moved silently toward the back door. The woods behind the cabin were dense, easy to disappear into if I could just get a head start. I was halfway to the door when his knock came. 3 sharp raps that mimicked Alessio's from the night before, but lacking the controlled patience. These were demanding, entitled, "Evie, I know you're in there, baby. Open up." His voice, that California drawl that had once charmed me, now sent shivers of revulsion down my spine. "Come on, Evie. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I just want to talk." I froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. The back door was just steps away, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. "Fine. Have it your way." The sound of something heavy striking the door jolted me back to reality. He was trying to break in. I bolted for the back door, throwing it open and plunging into the woods, just as I heard the front door splinter inward. Marcus's enraged shout followed me as I ran, weaving between trees, bag clutched to my chest, branches whipping at my face. "Evie, you can't run from me." I ran anyway, blind with terror, no direction in mind except away. Away from the cabin, away from him, away from the life I was trying to escape. I didn't see the route until it was too late. My foot caught, and I went down hard, pain shooting up my ankle as I tumbled down a small embankment. I landed at the bottom, disoriented and gasping, the taste of blood in my mouth from where I'd bitten my lip in the fall. Behind me, crashing sounds indicated Marcus was following. He'd always been a city boy, unused to forests, but determination would make up for his lack of woodcraft. I struggled to my feet, testing my weight on the injured ankle. It held, barely. I could keep moving, but running was out of the question now. I limped forward, each step sending shards of pain up my leg. The forest grew denser, pine needles cushioning my faltering steps as I ventured deeper into unfamiliar territory. Behind me, Marcus's shouts grew more distant, then louder again as he changed direction. He was hunting me, quartering the forest methodically like the predator he was. "You're only making it worse, Evie." His voice echoed among the trees. "You know I'll find you eventually." I bit back a sob, pressing my hand against my mouth to silence my ragged breathing. Twilight was approaching, the forest darkening by increments. In the failing light, I spotted a fallen tree, its massive trunk hollowed by rot and age. Not perfect, but the only hiding place available. I crawled inside, ignoring the smell of damp earth and decay, making myself as small as possible. The emergency bag pressed against my chest contained all I had left: my passport, the remaining cash, a flashlight I didn't dare use, and a small pocket knife that seemed laughably inadequate against Marcus. Time stretched, marked only by my thundering heartbeat and the distant sounds of Marcus crashing through the underbrush. The forest settled into night, temperatures dropping rapidly. My thin jacket offered little protection against the mountain chill, and my injured ankle throbbed mercilessly. "Evie!" His voice came again, closer now. "It's getting cold, baby. You're hurt. I saw the blood. Just come out and we can talk about this." The false concern in his tone made bile rise in my throat. How many times had I heard that voice after he'd hurt me? The same honeyed words, the same promises it wouldn't happen again, the same underlying threat that disobedience would only make things worse. A beam of light swept across the forest floor near my hiding place. He had a flashlight. I pressed myself further into the hollow, praying the rotting wood wouldn't collapse under my weight. The light stopped, hovering just feet from my position. "I know you're close," he said, voice deceptively soft. "I can feel you, Evie. I've always been able to feel you." I held my breath, eyes squeezed shut as if that could somehow make me invisible. The crunch of leaves came nearer. One step, two, a third that brought him right beside the fallen tree. "Found something interesting in your cabin," he continued conversationally. "Seems I wasn't your only visitor recently. Expensive coffee grounds in the trash, 2 mugs in the sink." A pause, heavy with implication. "You move on quickly, don't you? Is that why you ran? Found yourself a new man?" Relief flooded through me. He didn't know about Alessio specifically, just that someone had been there. But the relief was short-lived as his next word sent ice through my veins. "Doesn't matter. Whoever he is, he can't have you. You're mine, Evie. You've always been mine." The flashlight beam moved away, and his footsteps receded slightly. But I knew better than to move. Marcus was testing me, trying to flush me out by making me think he'd left. Minutes stretched painfully. My limbs grew numb from cold and the awkward position. Just when I thought I couldn't endure another moment, a new sound cut through the forest. A car engine, powerful and distinctive, approaching the cabin. Marcus's light swung wildly as he turned. "Who the hell?" I couldn't see what was happening, but I heard Marcus's footsteps retreating hastily toward the cabin. I waited, counting to 100 before cautiously extracting myself from the hollow tree. Standing was agony, my ankle nearly buckling as I tested my weight. Using a branch as a makeshift crutch, I hobbled toward the edge of the forest, where I could just make out the cabin's outline against the night sky. 2 vehicles were parked in the clearing, Marcus's silver sedan and a familiar black Maserati. Alessio had returned. I crept closer, staying within the tree line, straining to hear the confrontation that must be occurring. As I neared, voices carried on the still night air. "Looking for my girlfriend," Marcus was saying, his charm cranked to maximum. "We had a little disagreement and she ran off. I'm worried about her safety." "Your girlfriend." Alessio's voice was flat, unimpressed. "And you are?" "Marcus Thorne. And you are someone who doesn't believe your story." The cold dismissal in Alessio's tone would have made me smile under different circumstances. "The woman who stays here, she had bruises. Healing ones." A pause, then Marcus's voice hardened. Look, I don't know who you think you are, but this is between me and Evie. Evie, Alessio repeated, and I could almost see him filing away my real name. Well, Marcus Thorne, it appears Evie doesn't want to be found, by you at least. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, Alessio cut him off. I understand the kind of man who hunts a woman through the woods at night, who breaks down doors, who leaves bruises. The tension in the air was palpable, even from my position at the forest's edge. I held my breath, uncertain what would happen next. Marcus wasn't used to being challenged, especially by another man. His fragile ego wouldn't tolerate it. Who the fuck do you think you're talking to? Marcus's voice rose, the facade of charm evaporating. This is none of your business. Get in your fancy car and drive away before I make you regret sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. A sound that might have been a laugh from Alessio. Is that a threat, Mr. Thorne? It's a promise. I heard movement. Marcus was always physical when angered, throwing his weight around to intimidate. I pictured him stepping into Alessio's space, using his height and build the way he'd used it countless times to tower over me. But whatever happened next wasn't what I expected. There was a muffled grunt, a thud, and then Marcus's voice, now tight with pain. Let go of me, you psycho. Listen carefully, Alessio said, his voice so low I had to strain to hear it. I'm going to release you. You're going to get in your car and drive away. You will not come back here. You will not look for Evie again. If I discover you've disregarded this advice, our next conversation will be significantly less pleasant. You don't scare me, Marcus spat, but the tremor in his voice belied his words. I should, Alessio replied simply. Men like you, who prey on women, who mistake fear for respect, you're nothing. Less than nothing. Remember that when you consider returning. Another thud, then the sound of Marcus gasping for air. Do we understand each other? Silence. Then Marcus's sullen, yeah. Good. Your car's there. Use it. I pressed myself against a tree as Marcus stormed toward his sedan, face contorted with fury visible even in the dim light. He wrenched open the driver's door, then paused, looking back at Alessio, who stood silhouetted in the cabin's doorway. This isn't over, Marcus called. For your sake, it should be, Alessio responded, unmoved. Marcus slammed the car door, the engine roaring to life as he reversed violently, spraying mud in his haste to leave. I watched his taillights disappear down the road, relief warring with fresh terror. Marcus wouldn't give up that easily, and now Alessio, a man who clearly had his own dangerous connections, knew my real name and location. I was still weighing my options when Alessio's voice cut through the darkness. You can come out now, Evie. He's gone. A chill ran down my spine. I hadn't made a sound. How had he known I was watching? I know you're there, he continued, scanning the tree line where I hid. Your ankle is injured. The temperature is dropping. You need medical attention. He was right, of course. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me shaking with cold and pain. But trusting him meant stepping from one dangerous situation into potentially another. Why did you come back? I called, remaining hidden. He turned toward my voice, his expression unreadable in the darkness. I had a feeling you might need help. A feeling? I repeated incredulously. I made inquiries after I left. About a woman matching your description, staying alone in these mountains, he paused. And about a man looking for such a woman. Marcus Thorne has been asking questions all over the county. It wasn't difficult to connect the dots. My heart sank. If Alessio had been able to trace me so easily, Marcus's return had been inevitable. And you came back because men like him don't stop. Not without intervention. He stepped away from the doorway, moving toward his car. I'm leaving the cabin unlocked. There's a first aid kit inside. Use it or don't. Your choice. But he will return, Evie. And next time, I may not be here to intervene. The casual certainty in his voice chilled me more than the night air. Who are you? I asked again, the question that had been haunting me since his first appearance. He paused beside his car, the moonlight catching his profile. Someone who recognizes the hunted when he sees them. He opened the car door. Your ex-boyfriend will lick his wounds, gather his courage, and return with reinforcements. Likely tomorrow. I suggest you not be here when that happens. Terror gripped me. Reinforcements? Men like Thorne don't accept humiliation. He'll bring friends next time. He slid into the driver's seat. The first aid kit is on the kitchen counter. There's also food in a bag beside it. Enough for a day or two. He started the engine, the Maserati purring to life. I made my decision, stepping from the trees, using my makeshift crutch to support my weight. Wait! The headlights illuminated me as I limped forward, dirty, bloodied, and exhausted. Alessio watched my approach through the windshield, his expression giving away nothing. I can't stay here, I said when I reached the car, but I have nowhere else to go. He studied me for a long moment, then reached across to open the passenger door. Get in. Every instinct screamed that this was jumping from the frying pan into the fire, trading one dangerous man for another. But Marcus would return, and next time, Alessio wouldn't be there to intervene. Why are you helping me? I asked, hovering beside the open door. Perhaps I have my own reasons for disliking men who abuse women, he replied, or perhaps I'm simply in the right place at the right time. Does it matter? It did matter, but I had no better options. I slid into the passenger seat, the leather cool and butter soft against my skin. The door closed with a solid thunk that spoke of German engineering and ridiculous expense. Where are we going? I asked as he put the car in drive. Somewhere safe, he said, steering carefully down the muddy track. Somewhere Marcus Thorne won't think to look. As we pulled away from the cabin, I watched my temporary sanctuary recede in the side mirror. For better or worse, I'd traded one uncertain future for another, placing my trust in a man who radiated danger but who had inexplicably come to my rescue. The irony wasn't lost on me. Running from one man into the arms of another who might be equally dangerous. But something about Alessio Russo was different. His danger felt contained, controlled, and strangely not directed at me, at least, not yet. The Maserati glided through the darkness, its headlights cutting through the fog that had settled over the mountain roads. Alessio drove with the same precision that seemed to characterize everything about him. Hands at 10 and 2, eyes constantly scanning for hazards, maintaining a speed that respected both the treacherous conditions and the urgency of our situation. I sat rigid in the passenger seat, the pain in my ankle a dull throb compared to the turmoil in my mind. The events of the night played on loop. Marcus's arrival, my desperate flight, Alessio's unexpected return. What were the odds? Too small to be coincidence, too perfect to be chance. You're thinking too loudly, Alessio said, breaking the silence that had stretched between us for nearly 20 minutes. Sorry, I murmured automatically, then caught myself. Old habits, apologizing for existing, died hard. His eyes flicked to me briefly before returning to the road. Don't apologize, just tell me what you're thinking. I shifted, wincing as my ankle protested. I'm thinking this is crazy, getting into a car with a stranger who carries a concealed weapon and drives a car that costs more than most houses. Reasonable concerns, he acknowledged. What else? I'm wondering why you came back, why you confronted Marcus, why you're helping me at all. I turned to study his profile, sharp and austere in the dashboard's soft glow. I'm wondering who Alessio Russo really is. A slight smile curved his lips. You didn't Google me after I left? I'm almost disappointed. No internet at the cabin, I reminded him, and I was a little busy trying to stay hidden. Fair enough, he downshifted as we approached a particularly steep curve. Alessio Russo, import-export business, primarily between Italy and the eastern seaboard, specialty luxury goods. The vague description raised more questions than it answered. That tells me nothing. It tells you everything you need to know for now. His tone wasn't unkind, but it made clear that further probing wouldn't be welcomed. We lapsed into silence again, the miles disappearing beneath us. My eyelids grew heavy, the adrenaline crash and pain combining to pull me toward unconsciousness, despite my determination to stay alert. I jerked awake when the car slowed, realizing I dozed off against the window. We had left the mountain roads behind, and were now passing through what appeared to be an exclusive gated community. Massive houses, mansions really, set far back from the street, illuminated by tasteful landscape lighting. Alessio pulled up to a gate, pressed his thumb to a biometric scanner, and waited as the heavy iron barrier swung silently inward. Where are we? I asked, suddenly more awake. My home, he replied simply, guiding the car up a winding driveway toward a sprawling Mediterranean-style villa. Or one of them, at least. The house was impressive without being ostentatious. All clean lines and warm stone, wrapped in terraces and balconies that would offer spectacular views in daylight. Security lights activated as we approached, illuminating manicured grounds and what appeared to be a detached garage large enough to house several vehicles. "You live here alone?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. "Most of the time." He parked in front of the main entrance rather than the garage. "My staff comes 3 times a week. They won't be here until tomorrow afternoon." Staff. Of course he had staff. He exited the car and moved around to my door before I could reach for the handle. When he opened it, I tried to stand but nearly collapsed as my injured ankle refused to bear weight. Alessio caught me with reflexive speed, one arm sliding around my waist to support me. "Allow me," he said, and before I could protest, he'd scooped me into his arms as if I weighed nothing. The sudden proximity was overwhelming. His cologne, something subtle and expensive. The solid warmth of his chest against my side. The controlled strength in the arms that held me. I tensed instinctively, too accustomed to male strength being used to intimidate rather than assist. He noticed, of course. "I won't hurt you, Evie." Something in the way he said my name, my real name, not the alias I'd been hiding behind, made me believe him, at least in that moment. The front door unlocked automatically as we approached, responding to some unseen signal. Inside, recessed lighting activated, revealing an interior that matched the exterior in understated luxury. Italian marble floors, artwork I suspected was original rather than reproduction, furnishings that spoke of taste rather than ostentation. Alessio carried me through to what appeared to be the main living area, and set me carefully on a sofa that probably cost more than my car. "Wait here," he instructed, as if I could go anywhere in my condition. He disappeared down a hallway, returning moments later with a sophisticated-looking first aid kit and a glass of water. "Drink this," he said, handing me the water and 2 white pills. "For the pain." I eyed the pills suspiciously. "Just over-the-counter anti-inflammatories," he assured me, seeming to read my thoughts. "If I wanted to drug you, Evie, I wouldn't be so obvious about it." The blunt logic was hard to argue with. I swallowed the pills and drained the glass, suddenly realizing how thirsty I was. Alessio knelt before me, his movements clinical and impersonal as he examined my ankle. "May I?" he asked, hands hovering above the laces of my mud-caked boot. I nodded, biting my lip as he carefully unlaced and removed the boot, then eased off my sock. His touch was unexpectedly gentle as he probed the swollen joint, assessing the damage. "Not broken," he pronounced finally. "A moderate sprain. It needs to be wrapped, and you need to stay off it for at least a few days." He looked up, dark eyes meeting mine. "You're safe here in the meantime, am I?" The question escaped before I could filter it. His expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes, perhaps respect for my continued wariness. "Yes. Whatever you may think of me, I have never hurt a woman, not like he hurt you." The certainty in his voice was disarming. I wanted to believe him, which was dangerous in itself. "You need to clean up," he continued, wrapping my ankle with practiced efficiency. "There's a guest suite down the hall with an attached bathroom. Everything you need should be there: towels, toiletries, even some clothes that might fit you. You often have women staying in your guest room?" I couldn't help asking. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "The house came furnished and stocked. I rarely use the guest rooms at all." He secured the wrap with a small metal clip. "Can you manage with help, or would you prefer I carry you again?" The thought of being in his arms again sent an unexpected flutter through my stomach. "I can manage with help." He offered his arm, solid and unyielding as I leaned on it to stand. We moved slowly down the hallway to a door that opened into a suite larger than my entire apartment back in Philadelphia. A king-sized bed dominated one wall, while floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over what would likely be a breathtaking view in daylight. "Bathrooms through there," Alessio said, nodding toward a door on the far wall. "Take your time. I'll leave some food outside the door when you're done." "Thank you," I said, the words inadequate for what he'd done, but all I had to offer. He inclined his head slightly, then moved to leave. "Alessio," I called after him. making him pause at the threshold. "You never answered my question. Why did you come back?" He turned, studying me with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see more than I wanted to reveal. "Because I recognized something in you, Evie. Something familiar." A pause. "Get some rest. We'll talk in the morning." With that enigmatic answer, he closed the door, leaving me alone in the luxury of the guest suite. The bathroom was a marvel of marble and glass, with a shower large enough for 4 people, and a soaking tub that looked like it could swallow me whole. I opted for the shower, careful to keep my wrapped ankle dry as I washed away the grime of the forest and the lingering touch of fear. Clean clothes waited on a heated rack, silk pajamas that whispered against my skin, and a plush robe that enveloped me in warmth. As promised, when I opened the bedroom door, a tray waited outside, an artfully arranged plate of cold cuts, cheeses, and bread, alongside a glass of red wine and a pot of tea. I ate ravenously, not realizing how hungry I'd been until food was before me. The wine I left untouched. I needed a clear head more than I needed liquid comfort. From somewhere in the house, I heard Alessio moving about, his footsteps barely audible on the marble floors. A door opened and closed, a phone rang, and his voice dropped to a murmur as he answered it, speaking in rapid Italian that I couldn't have understood, even if I'd been able to hear the words clearly. Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me. I lay in the absurdly comfortable bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of the day's events. Marcus had found me once. He could find me again. And now, I was in the home of a man who, while he'd shown me nothing but kindness so far, radiated a dangerous power I couldn't quite define. The sound of my door opening sent me bolt upright, heart hammering. But it was only Alessio, silhouetted in the doorway. "Forgive the intrusion," he said quietly. "I wanted to check if you needed anything for the pain before I retire." "I'm fine," I lied, the throbbing in my ankle belying my words. He seemed to consider me for a moment. "You should know that I've taken precautions. Security has been enhanced. If Marcus Thorne attempts to approach this property, I'll know immediately." The statement should have been reassuring. Instead, it reminded me that I was completely at the mercy of this man's protection, a man I still knew almost nothing about. "What happens tomorrow?" I asked, voicing the fear that had been circling my mind. "Tomorrow, you rest," he replied, "and we discuss your options." My options? For dealing with Marcus permanently. He leaned against the doorframe, his face half in shadow. Men like him don't stop pursuing what they believe belongs to them. Not without significant discouragement. The way he said discouragement sent a chill down my spine. I don't want anyone hurt because of me. Even him? After what he did to you? There was no judgment in Alessio's tone, only curiosity. I thought about it. Really thought about it. Did I want Marcus punished? Yes. Did I want him hurt? The honest answer surprised me. I just want to be free of him, to not look over my shoulder every day wondering if he's there. Alessio nodded slowly. Freedom has different costs for different people. He straightened. "We'll talk more tomorrow. Try to sleep, Evie." As he turned to leave, a question that had been nagging at me finally found voice. "The ring you wear, that crest, I've seen it before." He paused, his back to me. "Have you?" "In a newspaper article," I said, the memory suddenly crystallizing, "about the Russo family in New York, about allegations of—" I stopped, the implications of what I was saying suddenly hitting me with full force. Alessio turned back, his expression unreadable. "Allegations of organized crime? Is that what you were going to say?" I couldn't answer, my throat suddenly dry. "The media enjoys sensationalizing my family's business interests," he said, his tone neutral. "Rest assured, everything I do is perfectly legal, mostly." The casual addition of that last word hung in the air between us. "You're afraid now," he observed. "Should I be?" "Not of me." His certainty was absolute. "Never of me, Evie." With that, he closed the door, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a growing suspicion about exactly who and what Alessio Russo really was. Despite my racing mind, exhaustion eventually won out. I fell into a deep sleep, dreaming of dark eyes that promised both danger and protection, and hands strong enough to break, but that touched only with gentleness. Morning light streamed through the windows, transforming the guest suite into a sun-drenched sanctuary. For a moment, disorientation gripped me, the unfamiliar luxury, the absence of fear that had been my constant companion for weeks. Then reality reasserted itself. My injured ankle, Marcus's return, and Alessio Russo, my enigmatic protector with ties to what I now suspected was the Italian Mafia. I tested my ankle, finding the pain reduced to a dull ache. The wrapping had held firm overnight, supporting the joint while I slept. Carefully, I made my way to the bathroom, where I discovered my clothes from yesterday, now cleaned and pressed, folded neatly on the counter alongside new undergarments still bearing price tags. The thoughtfulness of the gesture was simultaneously comforting and unsettling. After dressing, I ventured out of the guest suite, following the aroma of fresh coffee. The daylight revealed what darkness had hidden. Alessio's home was even more impressive than I'd initially thought. Sunlight poured through walls of windows, highlighting original artwork, custom furnishings, and breathtaking views of the surrounding mountains. I found Alessio in the kitchen, his back to me as he prepared something at the massive island countertop. Gone was the formal suit from our previous encounters, replaced by dark jeans and a simple gray Henley that did nothing to diminish the aura of authority that surrounded him. If anything, the casual attire only emphasized the controlled power in his frame. "Good morning, Evie," he said without turning, that sixth sense of his once again detecting my presence before I announced it. "Morning," I replied, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. He turned then, his dark eyes assessing me in a single sweep. My posture, my ankle, my general state. "You slept well? Better than I expected to." He nodded, seemingly satisfied, and gestured to one of the bar stools at the island. "Sit. Coffee?" I eased onto the stool, grateful to take weight off my ankle. "Please." He poured dark, aromatic coffee into a simple white mug and slid it toward me, along with a small pitcher of cream and a bowl of sugar. I doctored it to my taste, hyper-aware of his observation. "You're analyzing me," I said finally, looking up to meet his gaze directly. "Yes." No apology, no denial, just simple acknowledgement. "And what have you concluded? That you're stronger than you appear?" He returned to whatever he was preparing, slicing fresh fruit with the precision of someone well-practiced with knives. "Most women who've endured what you have would be far more broken." The casual assessment caught me off guard. "You don't know what I've endured. I know enough." He placed a plate of fruit, cheese, and freshly baked bread before me. "Eat. We have much to discuss." I picked at the food, despite the gnawing hunger in my stomach. "About yesterday. About Marcus Thorne," he corrected, leaning against the counter with his own coffee. "And how to ensure he never threatens you again." The directness was jarring after months of Marcus's manipulative word games. "I was planning to leave the country," I said. "I have a visa application pending. Australia." Alessio's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Running. Surviving," I corrected, a flash of defiance surfacing. "Not everyone has your resources or connections." "True enough." He sipped his coffee, studying me over the rim. "But running means looking over your shoulder forever. Men like Thorne, they don't forget. They don't forgive perceived slights. The world is smaller than you think, Evie, especially with social media and digital footprints." The truth of his words settled heavily on my shoulders. Even across oceans, Marcus could potentially track me down if he was determined enough, and he was nothing if not determined. "What's your alternative?" I asked. "Permanent resolution." The clinical phrase sent a shiver down my spine. "You mean?" "I mean ensuring he understands that pursuing you will bring consequences he cannot bear." Alessio set down his cup with deliberate care. "I don't mean killing him, if that's your concern. Death creates more problems than it solves, generally speaking." "Generally speaking," I repeated, wondering how many exceptions to that rule Alessio had personally encountered. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "You're very fixated on what you think I am." "And what am I thinking?" "That the Russo name in the papers, the ring, the resources at my disposal, they all point to organized crime." that you're currently having breakfast with a mafioso." He said it calmly, without defensiveness. I met his gaze steadily. "Am I wrong?" "My family has business interests across multiple industries. Some of those businesses once operated in gray areas of legality. It's true. But that was my father's generation, not mine." He moved around the island to sit on the stool beside me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, but not so close as to feel threatened. "What I am now is a businessman with resources and connections that can help you. The question is whether you'll accept that help." I studied him, trying to see beyond the carefully controlled exterior. There was danger in him, certainly. It radiated from him like heat, but none of it seemed directed at me. If anything, I sensed a strange protectiveness that went beyond simple chivalry. "Why do you care what happens to me?" I asked, the question that had been haunting me since he'd returned to the cabin. The truth this time. Something shifted in his expression. A momentary softness, quickly concealed. "My sister," he said finally. "Sophia. She was in a relationship similar to yours with Thorn. By the time my family realized how bad it had become..." He paused, a muscle in his jaw tightening. "We were too late." Understanding dawned, followed by a wave of sympathy. "I'm sorry. It was 5 years ago." His tone was matter-of-fact, but I could sense the wound beneath the words was still raw. "Since then, I've made it something of a personal mission to intervene when I see similar situations. When I met you at the cabin, the bruises, the fear, the isolation, I recognized the signs. So I'm what? Your good deed for the month?" I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. "You're someone who deserves better than living in fear," he countered smoothly. "Whether you accept my help is entirely your choice, Evie. I won't force anything on you, but know that if you walk away, Thorn will eventually find you again. And next time, I may not be there to intervene." The reality of my situation settled like a weight on my chest. Marcus had resources of his own, not on the scale of Alessio's perhaps, but enough to make running a temporary solution at best. "What exactly are you offering?" I asked cautiously. "Protection. A fresh start with documentation that Thorn can't trace. Financial support until you're established somewhere safe." Alessio's gaze remained steady. "And dealing with Thorn in a way that ensures he never pursues you again, without killing him," I clarified. "Without killing him," he confirmed. "Though I make no promises about his comfort level during our discussion." I should have been horrified by the implication, but instead, I felt a surge of something like vindication. After years of powerlessness, the idea that Marcus might experience even a fraction of the fear he'd inflicted on me was disturbingly satisfying. "If I say yes," I began slowly, "what happens next? You stay here while your ankle heals. I have associates who can expedite your documentation, passport, identity, whatever you need. Once you're physically recovered, you decide where you want to go, and I arrange it." His explanation was methodical, practical. "As for Thorn, leave him to me. And in return, what do you want from me?" There had to be a catch, some price for this unexpected salvation. Alessio seemed to consider the question. "Nothing. I don't believe you," I said flatly. "Nobody does something for nothing." A genuine smile flickered across his face, transforming his severe features momentarily. "Smart woman. But in this case, I'm telling the truth. Consider it honoring Sophia's memory, if you need a reason." I wanted to believe him, after months of Marcus's manipulations, after years of relationships where everything came with strings attached. The idea of unconditional help was almost too good to trust. "I need time to think," I said finally. "Of course." He rose from the stool with fluid grace. "Take all the time you need, but be aware. Thorn is likely already looking for you again. Your window for decisive action is limited." As if summoned by his words, Alessio's phone vibrated on the counter. He glanced at it, his expression hardening almost imperceptibly before he answered in rapid Italian. The conversation was brief but intense, his responses clipped and authoritative. When he disconnected, his eyes found mine immediately. "It seems we have less time than I thought. Thorn is making inquiries about me, who I am, where I might have taken you." A cold knot of fear formed in my stomach. How would he even know to ask about you? Small towns talk. Someone at the general store probably mentioned seeing my car in the area. It wouldn't take much to connect the dots. Alessio's mind seemed to be working rapidly, calculating options. We need to move you. This house is registered under my name. It won't take him long to find it. But your security is excellent against common threats. But I prefer not to test it against a man with nothing to lose. He moved with sudden purpose, gathering his phone and keys. Pack whatever you need. We leave in 30 minutes. The decisive shift jolted me into action. I returned to the guest suite, gathering the few possessions I had. My emergency bag, the clothes Alessio had provided. My mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Was I trading one controlling man for another? Was I jumping from the frying pan into a fire I didn't understand? Yet Alessio had had multiple opportunities to harm me, if that had been his intention. He'd shown nothing but respect for my boundaries, even as he offered protection I desperately needed. When I emerged from the guest suite, Alessio was waiting in the hallway, his expression grave. I've made arrangements. A property upstate, registered under a shell corporation. Untraceable to me or my family. You're coming with me? The question slipped out before I could consider it. Something softened in his gaze. Yes. Until I'm certain you're safe. The simple declaration shouldn't have brought the comfort it did. I hardly knew this man, yet in the chaos of the past 24 hours, he'd become an anchor I found myself clinging to. We moved through the house toward the garage, Alessio carrying my bag, his hand supportively under my elbow, as I favored my injured ankle. The garage door opened to reveal not the Maserati from yesterday, but a nondescript black SUV with tinted windows. Less conspicuous, Alessio explained, helping me into the passenger seat and better suited for the terrain where we're going. As he slid behind the wheel, a new thought struck me. What about your business? Your life? You can't just drop everything to babysit me. His hands paused on the ignition. My business runs itself for the most part. As for my life, he glanced at me, something unreadable in his dark eyes. Perhaps this is exactly where I need to be right now. The SUV purred to life, and as we pulled away from the villa, I realized I had made my decision without consciously acknowledging it. I was placing my trust, my safety, my future, in the hands of Alessio Russo, a man who might be dangerous to the world, but had shown me nothing but protection. I accept your help, I said quietly, as we turned onto the main road, all of it. He nodded once, a small gesture that somehow conveyed both satisfaction and solemn promise. No harm will come to you, Evie. Not while I draw breath. And despite everything, the uncertainty, the danger, the lingering fear, I believed him. For the first time since I'd fled Marcus, I felt the tightness in my chest begin to ease. Whatever came next, I wasn't facing it alone. As we drove away from the rising sun, I caught Alessio watching me in brief glances when he thought I wouldn't notice. There was something in those looks beyond protection, beyond duty to his sister's memory. Something that, in another lifetime, under different circumstances, might have made my heart race for entirely different reasons. Perhaps when this was all over, when Marcus was no longer a shadow over my life, I might explore what that something was. For now, it was enough to know I was safer at the side of this dangerous man than I had been in years, and that, in itself, was its own kind of freedom.